Thank you all for attending tonight, and I'd like to hand over to our Chief Executive of Timber Development UK to say a few words. David.
Thank you very much, Tabitha, and thank you very much, everybody. And welcome to, I think this is going to be the last webinar for a little while, at least, of this University Challenge series. So I'm Dave Hopkins. I'm the Chief Executive of Timber Development UK. For anyone that doesn't know, we were formed this year from the merger of the Timber Trade Federation and TRADA, two of the largest, most comprehensive and oldest trade associations in the timber supply chain, to put together to really form a one supply chain organization spanning from the sawmill to the specifier and from the specifier back to the sawmill. We wanted to push this together to increase dialogue, to increase understanding, and to increase the use of timber between all of those points on the supply chain. We've got importers, distributors, sawmills, merchants, manufacturers, architects, engineers. We're a very truly interdisciplinary trade association, and we've formed with a number of objectives, one of which is to be very much an agent of change towards low carbon construction. And obviously we want to do that through timber. When we talk about being an agent of change, one of those ways that you get to change within something like construction is to make sure that you address the barriers in construction. And one of those barriers is around education, training, and skills. And to make sure that everybody within the built environment, coming through a number of different disciplines that make up the creation of a building, the design, the construction, everything else, and the engineering, is to make sure that those people are equipped with the knowledge about timber in the first place in order that they can use more of it. One of the main complaints that we've seen over the years is that universities are not doing enough to educate people about timber. Do a lot of work with steel, a lot of work with concrete, a lot of work with other things, and not enough through timber. Maybe that's been our fault, but it's something that certainly we hope to start addressing or redressing from now on. And initiatives like this that have been brought together through a number of other interdisciplinary partners, and with particular thanks to Tabitha, and obviously to NMITE, and to the Passivhaus Trust for bringing this all together, and to Napier University for sort of housing and bringing it all together. We really want to see more and more of our professional construction folk using more timber. And we want to do it for a very obvious reason. We want to move people towards a low carbon construction system and a low carbon built environment future. For existing buildings, for new buildings, for installation, for furniture, for interior design, for refurbishment. And we do believe timber is the best way to do that. In fact, last year at COP26, we launched a built environment manifesto, which you can download online, which shows a number of ways in which timber can help achieve the goals of decarbonising construction. It sequesters carbon in the forest, it stores carbon in timber products. You can substitute for other carbon-intensive materials, whether it's steel, concrete, or others. Drives sustainable forest management and increases the growth of our forests, and then adds to a circular economy. We've got all that captured very briefly in this document, which I hope you will look at, read, and download. It also makes one final fifth policy recommendation within here about amongst the recommendations we make for governments, for construction sectors throughout the world, and that is to increase training and upskill current and future professionals in the use of timber and other natural building materials. This University Challenge, the Southside Hereford initiative, does exactly that. And it's brought together teams from 33 different universities, all working together to design a real life building. And if this is something that we've all felt is an important part of this challenge, to design a real life building, a community centre in Hereford for 3 different clients on a real life site. And I'm very pleased to see such a huge uptake, huge interest from across the country. I'm very pleased to see the results as they start coming through. And I'll be very pleased in the future to be meeting a lot of the people that are taking part when we start to look at the results and meet everybody at the end of this process. But that's all from me. And all I want to say at this point is thank you very much to everyone involved. The best of luck to all of the teams that are taking part and all of the students that are taking part. I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Thank you very much. Back over to you, Tabs.
Thanks, David. So I hope you're all seeing what I'm seeing. So University Design Challenge 2022. We could not have put this on without our sponsors. So a huge shout out to Transforming Timber, who have been our major sponsor, Akoya, PEFC, the Passivhaus 15 system, Stora Enso, Timber Decking and Cladding Association, Wood for Good, Rothablas, and our supporters who are providing software, the AECB, Design PH, Trimble, and the UFI VocTech Trust. Huge thank you. And we couldn't do this without our stakeholders. So NMITE, Growing Local, and Belmont Wanderers, who have charged you with helping them look at the design for the community building that they want to build. It's on the junction of two fields, a completely green site. So this is just an artist impression. This gives obviously not, you know, your building is going to be far more interesting than this. And this is what we're asking you to design as your interdisciplinary teams to specify, engineer and cost one single physical building that will provide a vibrant, inspiring and inclusive sports, food and skills community focal point for the people of South Wye. It has to make minimal impact and be predominantly from timber and climate ready. It's up to about 800 square meters, but it might be a bit less. And you have a budget of 1.6 million. And this year we're bringing it together, the challenge to you, along collaboratively with partners. And I just want to say a huge thank you for the interdisciplinary team that I'm working with. So Professor Robert Hairstans, Kirsty Connell Skinner, who unfortunately is not with us this week because she's off on a holiday, a well-deserved holiday, and it's also her birthday. So happy birthday, Kirsty. And Yogini Patel from the Passivhaus Trust. And with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Robert.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tabitha. I think in the with respect to the whole collaborative approach of what we're trying to achieve here and the utilisation of softwares and working remotely, one of the things that we identified was essentially how we could collate some of the content, bring it together with the stakeholders and partners and place it on a Miro board or a Miro board, depending upon how you wish to pronounce it. And I wouldn't go by necessarily my pronunciation, given my roots are squarely based in Barhead, which is outside Paisley near Glasgow. So I'll take lessons in terms of how to actually pronounce it. But what I wanted to do, or what I've done before the webinar, and indeed Tabitha collated it, was an email address from each of the participating teams. And I've essentially put that on a list and forwarded on an invite to, I'll say, Miro board, the Miro board. So that should hopefully be in your inbox. What I should be able to do is in the chat pop a link also, and then if the link doesn't work, etc., then we can always configure it after the event. So please let us know. But what I'll do now is I'll share screen and actually just run you through the Miro board and hopefully how it can help you with regards to the competition. So for those that haven't used Miro before, it's a good collaborative tool. I would encourage you to utilize it as you think appropriate. what you should be able to do, just as an example, is before we go into this in great detail, but this is a board that we have collated from the feedback, and you could therefore copy this board once you're set up, and then create a new board for your given team. You can choose to use one of the templates, and then if you wish, but the main thing is you'll be able to copy that the Miro board for your own utilization into there. So that means that you as a team can then frame your thinking around that. Now you want to design, you can drop images in there, you can post notes and create comments towards each other within your team. So you can set that up, and then you can obviously share it. You can give the board a name, and you can share it within your own team members and utilize it from there. It's pretty intuitive on the basis that yeah, I picked it up pretty quickly, so that I think that serves as demonstration. Going back into the sort of original Miro board, and what we've essentially done is collated content into it so from the high level, as Tabitha's just described, outlining the competition, the partners and the sponsors, etc. You've seen some of this information before, but within here, we have the YouTube channel link, we have the website content, and if there's future event rights, then they'll be posted there also. So that's just to act as a sort of high level introduction. In the board itself, there's an overview that's been collated together, which gives you information on each of the webinars that have went before this evening's event. So if you need to sort of jog your memory or post a comment on there, then you can use that as a reminder and consolidate some thinking around it with regards to the design that you want to create. As I say, and as Tabitha has already pointed out, there's a series of stakeholders that are participating in this with us, and it's running concurrent with a live real life project. And you'll remember that in one of these webinar series, we had a presentation from this lady here, Louise, on the IPI initiative. Well, separate to that, what we had was the Integrated Project Insurance undertake a workshop with the stakeholder partners. So we held that as a live event. So we've got that content captured within the Miro board because we ran this event on the 23rd of the 2nd at the same time as the webinar series was taking place, in order to inform the brief that we've created. So we brought them together, and Louise went through the workshop activities, which were focused in on, some of the, as Louise indeed explained in one of the webinars, some of the challenges and problems with the current construction delivery procurement practices. So Louise unpacked that with the stakeholders of this project in a similar manner that she ran through on the webinar. And yeah, and explaining that to, as I say, to the stakeholders, who are not necessarily construction professionals, but there were also construction professionals in the room. And as a part of that approach, there was then a sort of team building exercise that was undertaken. So there's a sort of exercise that she's undertaken to understand the knowledge of the participants, and also, like, to an extent, the kind of the mindset of those that are going into the workshop, in terms of whether they're a theorist or activist or reflection. So that's something that you might want to consider within your own teams, as who's taking on what role, not necessarily just down to their level of expertise, but also just in terms of their personality, right, and how they operate. So that's something that was considered within this workshop in itself. So Louise did this with us, and we actually did follow in the sort of presentation piece. We actually undertook a team building exercise, that they put on, which I wouldn't give too much away because at some point you may be able to participate in this. But I think a key point to that is, particularly for those teams that are forming from different universities and multidisciplinary, there might be an exercise that you want to do aligned with the challenge itself to help you build as a team, and use an activity which is kind of separate from say construction specifically, as we did in this activity. And the premise of that was to form the sort of team building exercise, which was good fun. It wasn't overly fun to start with, to be honest, because we were all a bit confused as to what was going on, and we didn't necessarily know each other all that well in some instances. But what came together in the end is actually the level of collaboration between the attendees. So there's a wee description there with regards to what we undertook and how it helped us build as a team, and then to switch that back in many respects to what was the purpose of the event or the workshop, which was really around how to bring the stakeholders together to help form and curate the brief which you've now been presented with. So that content's there, it's on the Miro board, and you can see during the course of the event as well, there was some discussion and points of notes which we've, which we're taking a record of, and they have been collated here for you to also to run through. So hopefully that will help you maybe give a wee bit of a shape and insight into the individuals involved. Where that then went was, we focused in on Southside as a project. You're aware of what it is. It's in Hereford. There is information available via sort of Herefordshire Council, etc., and it's some of which is captured here, and you'll be able to get access to. There's information on each of the stakeholders, some information on the area of land itself, and a high level view, sort of satellite image showing the site in particular, and then the positioning of Growing Local and Belmont Rovers specifically, because they have more of an immediate need of the land per se. NMITE is positioning this as actually just to participate in it as a project and provide an opportunity for the learners and stakeholders, etc., to engage with the project. So that gives a bit of an overview of the sort of landscaping of it. And then really the nature of the workshop was to look at the respective partners, look at some of the information that had been collated with regards to the project in advance of the workshop, which you'll be able to kind of go through here. You'll see what we did was we extracted the content that was given to us onto the Miro board, and actually the stakeholders of the project all have access to this also, and they posted comment, etc., on the board, and we then responded to that comment, and as a result, there's sort of notes on here with respect to what's written and some of the language that was changed as a result of the collaborative thinking. So, for example, in the first instance, it was put down, this should be a stunning destination cafe, and then actually it was about, well, it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be stunning. We want it to be attractive. We want it to be aesthetic or sympathetic to the landscape, but we don't necessarily want, the Shard or something sitting in the field of Southside. So if you regard that as stunning, right? But what we do want a destination cafe and something that's for the local community. So some of the language and the semantics changed. So that content has been extrapolated for each of the partners from what they brought to the table. There's something here more specific on that was articulated during the course of the workshop and the fact finding, and some of their partnership requirements, like what they stated, they kind of needed explicitly. So we took those down as part of the workshop activity, etc. And then we sort of fed what kind of came out of this was almost a bit of a Venn diagram, where really what we're talking about is that how these stakeholders all want to collaborate with in terms of the building. So the building is almost like at the center of this Venn diagram of stakeholder requirements, the building is kind of at the core of it, acting as this sort of collision space. And what it needs to do is have a sort of broader impact into the community. So essentially, the workshop brought the stakeholders together, the pre-thinking of that, the articulation of it into the partnership, individual partnership requirements, and then almost how that could be collated together with an emphasis on the building itself, but importantly how that building in the first instance has a sort of impact into the community, so it can be a vehicle within that community. So in that sense, then, for what presented itself as for the building, what is the shared vision of the building, and that's articulated high level here in terms of, you know, that the building serves the outdoor activities. So that was a really core theme, actually, in terms of the focus is on the building, but actually it's how it responds within the landscape. It has to be safe for use in terms of children and corresponding safeguarding measures, welcoming, inclusive, accessible, and comfort for the users, simple, low cost to run and repair. So the partners of the project will form a Southside community partnership. So there'll be community interest company, there'll be a council land transfer, and there'll be an ownership model between the partners and trustees formed with sort of board membership from each of the respective organisations. So in that regard, the building has to have, you know, it's going to have to be a sustainable business model that underpins it. So therefore, that's why this low cost to run piece comes from, absolutely. There's core needs in there in terms of the cook school, the bar, the kitchen, the changing rooms as well, and also making mention that there is existing sort of a shipping container type entities there that could almost be repurposed for the building. It needs to be future proof for extension and any particular changes. So again, bringing in some of the theories of circularity, and then the experience. It should be, you know, have an experience, have an atmosphere, have a sense of sort of magic to it, to bring that wider community piece into it. And therefore, that's what brings it down in terms of the broader impact that this building should have. So when thinking about your design, thinking about how the design can capture much of this and have that broader impact into the community. And again, so there is an articulation here of that wider sort of business planning piece, because the building in itself will be at the centre of this new sort of cooperative and correspondingly sustainable business model. So essentially, the building itself will have to generate income and footfall, etc., and utilisation, such that it functions as a sustainable entity, financially as well as environmentally, of course. So that is captured on the Miro board, and yeah, has essentially been drawn out. So you have a full brief that your task is to respond to, which we're not going to go through, or I'm certainly not going to go through in absolute detail this evening. But what we have done is we've pulled it into the Miro board here, which then, if you're doing it on this shared Miro board, which is shared between ourselves, the stakeholders, and you as the teams that are participating within the challenge, you can post comment on that. Those comments will be shared around everyone, but then ultimately we will look to respond to it whilst you're participating within the challenge. So that's where this collaborative tool can really help to take shape. But of course, this documentation will also be available to you in PDF form. So that kind of sums it up in terms of where we're at. It's fantastic collaborative effort. This a great challenge that we're all participating in. There's 44 universities, over 150 students, 12 teams are forming, and all of this is to test the competency framework that's been created on behalf of the timber sector on timber technology, engineering and design. So that fantastic to be participating in it. And then ultimately, these are the sort of key milestones that you'll all be working to over the course of this, in terms of the June entries, and then we'll be doing the long list and the short listing. And then ultimately we'll all get together, or the majority of us will get together at least on the 21st and 22nd and 23rd of July for the live judging and awards at NMITE in Hereford. And yes, we do have a hog roast and an ice cream van, and we've also had free alcohol being supplied to us by companies in the area. So there's plenty to hopefully look forward to. And as I say, that board is available for you to have a look at, and hopefully I've not given away too many secrets. Tabitha, I'll hand it back to you.
Brilliant, thanks, Robert. Yeah, just remember you're on live TV, basically. Yogini.
Great, thank you. That was awesome, Robert. There's a lot of information on that mirror board, everybody, so have fun. It's going to take you a while to get through all of that. Yeah, so I am today going to be talking about Passivhaus predominantly, and obviously we are looking at designing a timber building, and a big part of meeting the net zero aspirations of this building is also to try and meet Passivhaus standards. So let's just get my presentation up. And a key thing that we'll be looking at today is why bother with efficiency? So we get a lot of kickback sometimes about Passivhaus and whether it's the right way to go in terms of meeting zero carbon. So we're going to be looking at that today, and I'm going to try and give you an overview of why we should definitely be looking at Passivhaus. So 35% of all global energy is used on our buildings, and that's a huge amount globally in terms of just overall carbon emissions. And predominantly in buildings, that is used for heating and cooling and operating actual buildings. Letty actually say that this might be more in the UK in terms of emissions. It could be closer to 49–50%, which is again crazy amount of energy. So there's a huge potential there in terms of reducing our emissions from our buildings. And the operational bit is what we'll be focusing on today. So this is that yellow bit. This is a diagram from Letty's Climate Emergency Guide. The pink bits are kind of like the embodied carbon, so that you get this massive carbon burp at the beginning. But as you can see, throughout the life cycle of the building, operational emissions are huge. And actually, these are probably slightly less because it doesn't take into consideration that performance gap that we've been talking about in previous webinars. So what does Passivhaus do? Well, it looks at the energy balance of a building, it looks at losses and it looks at gains, and it squashes basically all the losses and that heating demand. So that's a huge amount of that 35% that we talked about at the beginning. It squeezes it down all the way down to 15 kilowatt hours per meter squared per annum. And it's also really good at eliminating that performance gap. So that's what it's very good at. And this is why, or some of the reasons why, we should be looking at an efficiency first approach to delivering net zero, and actually why Passivhaus is crucial to meeting that. So this is a summary slide that I'm going to keep coming back to. I'm going to try and whiz through these kind of explanations. This is actually a summary based on a very long report that the Passivhaus Trust did a while back now, maybe a few years, on why Passivhaus is a good route to getting to net zero. There's also a load of tutorials and a lot of information out there. So this summary slide is actually very good in terms of just getting those key messages across. So we're going to look at grid capacity first. And most people would say, well, why do we need to bother with Passivhaus? It's really expensive. It's really hard. It's difficult to train everybody. It's too extreme. And why do we need to bother with all these efficiency measures when we can just sit back and wait for the grid to decarbonize? And actually, the grid is predicted to decarbonize quite well. It's we're using a lot less fossil fuels. But the problem with that is peak loads. So at the moment, the current peak load for heating our homes, and this is just homes in the UK, is currently 170 gigawatts delivered by gas. The current UK's electric grid capacity is only 60 gigawatts. So there's a huge discrepancy there. And even when we upgrade that capacity by 2020 or 2050, it's only projected to be 100 gigawatts. So it doesn't meet our current demand in terms of heating our homes. And then by 2050, all sectors are going to be looking to access that low carbon energy source as we electrify everything, particularly transport. So that's kind of a huge factor we need to consider when we do that. So even if we switch all homes to air source heat pumps or hydrogen or some sort of green heating, there's a limit to how much renewable energy can be deployed through the national grid. So the capacity is an issue. And it's also large, we're talking about large infrastructure upgrades. So these are really costly and they also take a lot of time, and we don't actually have that time at the moment if we want to rapidly decarbonize. So we can't solely rely on the grid to go green and clean and fix all our problems with low carbon heating. So what about throwing a load of renewables at the problem instead? Let's get every new build having solars or PVs or something renewable on site. Well, actually, when you look at that, the cost issue comes into effect. So it's far cheaper to save energy than it is to generate energy in almost every scenario. It costs about 3 to 4 kilowatt pence per kilowatt hours compared to any of the other sources of generation. So again, if we're talking about how to do this quickly and cost effectively, building to Passivhaus is probably your best bet. And also, by making those fabric first improvements on your building, you're reducing that demand, that energy demand across the whole cycle of the building. So that graph we showed earlier with from Letty, you're talking about 60 to 80 years of reduced energy demand. And actually your energy generation technologies are probably going to, it's a bit like a roof, you're going to have to look at it and either do replacement or maintenance works every 20 to 25 years. So it always works out cheaper to build better. So now we're leaning towards more of, Passivhaus is making sense. We should be reducing our energy demand. Option one is we don't do any of that, and we just rely on renewables and decarbonisation. We know now that that's probably not the best idea. So if we look at getting down to Passivhaus levels and reducing the amount of renewables that we actually need, in theory, we need way less renewables to meet a net zero building. So what does that look like in terms of a real home? So typical energy demand for a 68 metre squared house, which is typical size house in the UK. For a Passivhaus with an air source heat pump, you're looking at just under 4,000 kilowatt hours a year. So that, if that's the amount that we need to meet in terms of generation, that still equates to 14 solar panels. So that's brilliant, job done. We just need 14 solar panels on every house. Actually, when you think about looking at it logistically, that's really difficult. So 14 solar panels on a relatively small roof, which should be south facing, is quite difficult. And when you think about what a 68 metre squared dwelling is, it's not big. It's either like a 3-bed masonette, or a flat, like a 2-bed flat. So it's quite small. So is it realistic that we're going to get flats to get, every flat to have solar panels on site? It's highly unlikely. And this is just Passivhaus. So this is we've already reduced our demand down. If you're not doing that, you're looking at double the amount of solar panels on the same size roof. So it's really, really tricky, really difficult. And the other thing to think about is that we don't have renewables seem like they're, this amazing thing and they're infinite, but actually wind and solar and, all of that's infinite. to actually capture that and use that, you need a solar panel, or you need a turbine, or you need some sort of technology, and they are not infinite, they're finite. So they also all cost money, and they all cost carbon. Like you generate carbon emissions just by producing and making them. So that also has to factor into our considerations. Yeah, so is on site even practical? That's the question that we need to ask as well. So if they're not, think about, you know, when you're designing your project, you've got the luxury of having all this greenfield site around you. What are the best options for you in terms of where are you going to place your renewables? Are there local or regional solutions rather than on site? Just think about the boundaries of what you're doing and where you're placing things. And then renewables aren't without their problems either. So there's seasonal disparity, which means it's not always conveniently, you know, windy when you want to make a cup of tea and everyone's watching the World Cup and they all want a cup of tea at the same time. So there is that issue of, you know, they're not always, at some points we'll have too much and at other points we'll have too little. And that means that we need to create storage and we need batteries. And with storage comes losses. So again, even if you create that amount of really efficient renewables, you're generally not going to be able to use it as efficiently as you would like to think that you could. So even in our net zero nirvana, where we're not burning any fossil fuels, we've still got these logistical problems to look at. Yeah. And so that's just hitting home why Passivhaus, reducing levels to Passivhaus demands or beyond is kind of crucial, because anything that is net zero or new build that is not meeting net zero is adding to the problem. So if you're not as efficient as possible, you're adding to the problem. When you look at this graph, we're looking at retrofit. And it just highlights that actually new builds are a really small part of the bigger picture. Retrofit is a far bigger concern that we need to be addressing in terms of buildings. And if you see there, pre-1990, almost all of those homes have already been built and they'll all be available in 2050. So new build is quite simple and straightforward compared to retrofit, which is a much more complex and challenging issue. And so therefore all new builds should literally be built to the best possible efficiency standards that we can. And if you're not, then you're just adding to the problem, because basically anything that isn't Passivhaus or equivalent or better will probably need retrofitting sooner rather than later. So you're just adding to this retrofit problem, which is not great. And then these, the next few, I'm not going to spend too much time on because I feel like they've been covered quite well in previous recordings. So health and well-being, again, we bang on about how buildings are not, it's not just about energy, buildings are about people. And we've just released this health and benefits guide, which is freely available to everyone. And it just delves into the basics, but also goes into specifics in terms of, you know, most people want a healthy home, so that's no mold, no condensation, no drafts, less overheating, stable temperatures, better quality internal environments, better air quality. But it also, you know, it provides improved concentration levels in schools. It produces reduced absenteeism in offices. It helps lower maintenance and running costs in and lower rent arrears in social housing. So there's lots of different benefits, and that there's financial, there's health, there's social aspects. Go and read more in our guide. And then fuel poverty, we've touched on quite a lot, I feel, in a lot of the webinars. And again, because of the, you know, the increased cost of living, the energy price hikes that are coming out in April very soon, we're all much more aware of these issues. And again, it's not just, you know, it's fuel security rather than fuel poverty that we should be looking at. And the war in Ukraine has really highlighted that. You know, Boris has gone to, you know, Saudi Arabia to make a new energy deal. And so fuel security is kind of a big issue that Passivhaus can really help you with. By reducing that demand, you are basically helping with protecting people. And again, you can see there on the slide, it's not just it's not just the energy issue, it's that societal issue. So you could potentially save the NHS 1.4 billion in first year treatments alone, just from, removing the cold homes issue. So it's not small numbers. We're looking at really big picture stuff here. And then the performance gap, again, we've done like a whole webinar on this. So, most new builds suffer from a 60% overuse in energy. They don't design as intended. And what I wanted to bang home here is basically how Passivhaus eliminates that performance gap is through clear, measurable targets. But not only that, it has a quality assured certification process. So it makes it very clear whether you're achieving what you set out to or not. It's very black and white, in or out. And this is really good for your clients and really good for you, because you know exactly how your building is performing, whether it's, even if it's good or bad. It just means that you have a clear idea and understanding of what's happening. And Letty used the EUIs, the energy use intensity standard. So it's very similar, but there is, how do you ensure those targets are being met? They don't have anything in terms of that quality assured performance criteria yet. So they have the targets, but they don't have how you get to them. So what's really important there is PHPP and the design modeling tools that are going to be available to you. Really do go and explore them and understand them. And even if you don't get to, really appreciate how they actually work, because they are quite scary spreadsheets, but, understand the basics and understand what you're looking at. That's just like really good basic level thing I think everyone should try and get. And again, the pH ribbon is also really useful. It's a plug-in to PHP, and Design PH offers you like a really good visual way of looking around all of those kind of issues. So, and that's just the performance gap. So just in summary, anything less than Passivhaus is locking in efficiencies that will probably need to be upgraded again in the near future. Don't design buildings that need to be retrofit. Passivhaus or better is the best fit for a decarbonised grid. And it's not just about energy, it's also about health, well-being. There's so many other co-benefits of building efficiently. And finally, Passivhaus is a complementary standard. It's not the only, it's part of an equation. So we have to consider embodied carbon alongside operational carbon. And this just makes it clear why that level of operational reduction is really necessary. And that was a really whistle-stop tour of quite complex research. So I'm really pleased to announce that we are making these on-demand tutorials free for all participants of the competition. So there's 8 30-minute modules. They're all on demand, they're all online. You can watch them whenever you want at your leisure. If you don't have time to go and watch 4 hours worth of modules, which this covers both operational and embodied, so I do recommend that you do go and watch them. If you don't have time, you can also download same kind of information, but summary level in our new Passivhaus primers. And they're all freely available on our website. And that's it from me.
Thanks, Yogini, really appreciated. I just need to share screen now again. And yes, please take up the Passivhaus Trust's amazing offer. Again, more professionals who are so willing and keen to give their hard-earned sort of knowledge to upskill our future built environment professionals. As we're in a really strange and exciting place in history. I mean, we're all learning currently as we go along. We're all collaborating, and the more that we can share this knowledge, the more chance we have of stopping temperatures rising as much as they are predicted to. And we know that universities are not able to move as quickly as we would all like them to, and they are constrained within their own professions and the bodies and the exam things, which is why we're bringing you this challenge, and why I'm just going to have a quick flash through the 78 speakers who have given their time. And this is 78 individual speakers who have spoken since we kicked off on the 11th, no, not the 11th, the 30th of the 11th, way back in the Building Centre as part of the World of Wood. And the theme there is wood equals hope. And will it move forward on my screen? It's not going to move forward. So we asked professionals at the top of their game to come and talk about construction in a climate crisis. And so we heard from Anthony Thistleton, and who wore Thistleton Architects, and Dr. Gemma Jerome from Building with Nature, and Mark Farmer of the Cast Consultancy, and Sarah Lewis from the Passivhaus Trust, and Paula McMahon from SRM, and Kelly Harrison from Whitby Wood, and Kat Scott, who was representing both DRMM and Architects Declare, and I think she's also works with Letty, and Sarah Broadstock and Studio Bark, who also is in the educational arm of ACAN, and Seb Lam-Lomas, who works for Archetype and is also involved in ACAN. We then heard from our 3 software providers, from Alison at Trimble and Dave Edwards at Design PH, who will come back and give workshops in how to use it. So please don't be put off by Yogini's, like spreadsheets and things. It is easily understandable, and we have Sarah Lewis as a backup, who wrote the book on how to use PHPP. And then we're working also with Tim Martell from the AECB. Now, the AECB carbon calculator has been designed for small companies and professionals, and it breaks down things like iJoist into their components, so you know exactly how much embodied carbon is within that product. And that links the AECB carbon calculator, links into the Design PH and the PHPP package, and it all works off SketchUp, which links into Trimble. So again, it's all collaborative and it all works and comes together. Just before Christmas, we heard from our 3 clients about their hopes and desires, their aims and ambitions for this building that you are going to help design for them. We also heard from Nick Grant of the Passivhaus Trust. We kicked off in earnest back in January, where we heard from Scott McCauley, who I'm sure some of you will know from the Anthropocene School of Architecture. Harsha Gore and Mohit Booch from Decolonize Architecture gave us an insight into looking at other climates and other forms of architecture across the world, and would that actually be of benefit to Hereford. And then Pablo van der Lucht came and talked about tomorrow's timber, and the takeaway from there is the understanding of how timber can be reused time and time again. Not only does it grow naturally from a seed and sunlight and water and sequester carbon, but if you use it in big chunks and then you need to take your building down, you can reuse those big chunks of timber and you have a cascade of use. And then we went to see a really interesting passive house building, the Enterprise Centre, and heard from Archetype and BDP. Engineering value, and this is what Robert mentioned too, and whole life cost. How do you engineer value from what you have? And we heard from George Pleasant and Cast Consultancy about modern methods construction and design for manufacture and assembly, and how bringing your cost consultants right in at the beginning can help you meet the things that you do need to meet. And then Alex Abbey and Karis Costello came and talked about some timber buildings that they designed, which led very nicely into the IPI initiatives. So this is the alliancing contract the Cullen Studios themselves had used. And yeah, a tip is to go back and look at that alliancing contract, because how do our clients or your clients make sure that they get what they want? And then Nicola came and talked about offsite solutions and some work they've been doing in Scotland. We then got into the properties of engineered timber products and heard from Dan Ridley Ellis and Wojciech, and then that was rounded up by Jasper Mead taking into those products into a live build, which was based on twin wool, which again, go and look at, because that was a very cost efficient way of building with homegrown timber and warm cell insulation. The connections are stronger than the timber is, and they really need to be understood. And Robert led that evening. So we heard from Andrew Livingston at Edinburgh Napier, and Gavin Knowles at the University of Bath, and Shingi Terera from Whitweed Wood, which I know some of you are very excited to hear from because she'd worked with some very famous timber architects. And then Gregor Mitchell brought it all back together in designing timber houses from with Passivhaus certification. So again, bringing it all that back together. Building sustainably in a built environment. So our sustainability director at Timber Development UK, Charlie Law, led the evening, and Professor Francesco Paponi explained all about the environmental impacts of timber and how the embodied carbon and the sequestration works. Some really great slides there. Nip back and have a good look at that. Jack Dilworth brought in the biodiversity and understanding about building on that particular field. And then Adrian Campbell introduced circular economy. So designing in case you need to take that building apart again. And so you can reuse the components. Software, had an evening with Trimble. Huge shout out to Trimble for the software and the platforms that they're providing. We went on to making the right choices. So how much embodied carbon goes into your building by using timber, you're going to reduce it anyway. But how do you know which product to pick so that you not only get it best structurally, best for longevity, best for durability, but actually best for the environment, so that you leave more timber to go into buildings than using too much timber in one building. So go and hear from Matt Caldwell and Abel, who talked really about I-joists, and James Norman, who a book that we've pointed you at designing timber structures, and then Beth Williams, again, bringing the Passivhaus back into it and looking at how you design foundations and footings so that you minimize embodied carbon. We then looked at design performance, and thanks Yogini, because you mentioned this before. So how do you specify and deliver timber buildings to the Passivhaus standard? So Anna Carton from PH15 gave great examples. Go and have a look. And Florence Collier from Humblebee followed up with getting all the mechanical and electrics in there, because some people say that you should actually start with the mechanical and electrics, lay those out, and then put the structure around it, and then end up with the facade and making your building pretty. So again, it's the function, and then the form, and then the aesthetics. And Polly Upton brought it all again back to bringing all those things together. And what she brought in, which again you might want to look at within when you're designing your building, is access to site. Because Polly had some real difficulty getting onto her site, and yes, she had to change her solution to make that happen. So have a look at the maps and understand how it works, and come and ask us. And then how do you get it right on site? There's two things one thing we really need to consider is moisture. So Robin took us through, his knowledge of moisture, not only during construction, but actually in use. Jay Cottrell took that into the Passivhaus homes and the systems they use, and gave a real in-depth talk on the I-joist system that they use, which is infilled with warm cell, and to get buildings that perform and they deliver what people want and what people need. And Jamie from Situ came and explained about their panelized off-site system. So that is a fully panelized system that is delivered, so a bit like toast racks, and then they put it together. Off-site and industrial construction. So we had some superstars, and Kirsty, who's again not here tonight, fantastic host, far better than all of us. Sorry, Yogini. So, into Robert and his speciality, which is modern methods construction, designing for manufacture and assembly. So lots of really useful information there. And there's a book that we've pointed you at to go back and look at. Tim Crump brought, so they design timber frame buildings. You call them traditional timber frame buildings, which are sort of like cruck frames and pegged together with bolts. So there'd be traditional oak frames, and how they've modernized that and how they can build that to Passivhaus standards. Are you going to use solid timber frame? And are you going to maybe look at what Oakrights could possibly supply? And they are not far down the road, so very local company. And then Helena Lidlow took us all through modern methods of construction and volumetric buildings, and how those factories, when they're laid out exactly the supply chain all the way through it, so that you get a seamless production, well worth having a look at, and then looking at what she describes and taking it back to the solution that you are going to propose and put forward. Do your buildings perform as intended? So building performance evaluation, should you be starting with that? As opposed to ending with it, because your clients have some specific needs. Well worth going and having a look at Diana Waldron's talk from Wood Knowledge Wales. There's a specific, sorry, losing me S's and me P's, specific knowledge sheet and a template that you could adapt and ask the clients, is this exactly what they need and what they want? And then you can monitor against that. Professor Sean Smith came and talked about acoustics. So acoustics, very important in timber building, but he talks so much more than that, about the robust details that you really maybe want to go and look at. And then Gwilym Still looked again at the mechanical and electrics and bringing them in from the beginning. Our main sponsor, huge shout out to Transforming Timber, who are doing amazing things in Scotland. So if you're looking at homegrown CLT, is that going to be your structural system for the Southside Hereford building? We know they can do it, and they took you through the whole system. And Matt Stevenson took you on a tour of the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre and all the equipment they have up there. Robert and Wojciech took you through again the timber, the properties, what they are, what you can expect from homegrown timber. And then Professor Luke Bisbee addressed fire, because fire always comes up, and we need to not only design for it, but be aware of the mitigation that we need, so that human life is preserved, and that's what you're designing around. We couldn't do this without, as I've said, without our sponsors. So on one evening, the sponsors that we have all came and talked about their products and why they were involved in this challenge. So if you're responsible sourcing and looking at certification from the forest all the way through to the end building, then go and look at Alan Watkins from PEFC UK. Sarah Verger, who couldn't be with us on the night, sent in a recording. So Wood for Goods information is, again, really relevant. Look at their EPDs on timber and the timber products, and Sarah highlighted a couple of really interesting case studies that you might want to go and look at. Janet Sycamore from the Timber Development UK, so it's in my head, the Timber Decking and Cladding Association gave real in-depth information on cladding systems. So go and have a look at that, because there's some really good details and some really good tips there. She also provided some information on decking. So maybe you've got a veranda and you've got decking outside. Really good information. Mike Lewis came and talked about Accoya, so modified timber, and there's a potential obviously to use it within cladding, but also very good for windows and doors. Really good thermal performance, really good durability. And then Mila, who I think we all know here from Stora Enso, came and laid out the tools that Stora Enso have, not only the calculatus, which would be really good for engineers, but the whole breadth of products. So Stora Enso are not just CLT producers, they produce solid timber and so much more. So go and have a look, and a huge thank you to our sponsors. Bringing timber into the digital age. So we use computers and digital information from the forest all the way through to the post-occupancy building. And Gary from Wood Knowledge Wales came and set that in context. Luke Whale from Staircraft came and talked about the platforms that they use for production and how that feeds, all the way along and into the the built environment, he put forward a couple of tools that you might want to go and have a look at. Jamie, unfortunately, had a client and couldn't be with us. And then Mila and Gareth came and talked about the supplies of timber from that digital point of view. You know, how when you start with a client and you put in an order for that timber, how that gets transported back to the mills and then into the forest, so that then timber comes all the way through into the products and ends up on your building site. And as I said, we talked about fire. Really interesting evening with Professor Jose Torrero Cullinan, who is a professor at the University College London, who specialises in fire. Andrea White, who talked us through what a fire engineer's job is and what the knowledge that you need to know. And then Martin McLagan, who talked about individual timber components and how they react to fire. So you'll need to know that. And yeah, they all agreed, which again, with our speakers, they led seamlessly one into another, and yet they had not met each other beforehand. We didn't manage to bring you this one, accelerating the use of timber, but I wanted to put it in there. And then quality and the built environment. This is so important. And so Mark Mill talked about the certification of all the products that go into the certification that is needed to make sure that those products, those building products, reach a specific standard. Sarah Lewis came back to talk about the certification of Passivhaus and how you reach it, so all the steps you take along the way. Sarah Price came and talked about the mechanical and electrical and good tips on where you place each so that your building does perform. And then Tom from Verithorm came and talked about the monitoring and how you could provide a reasonably priced monitoring system to prove that your building performs. And this is we are tonight, so I'm going to just skip over that. So I know lots of you are aware of the YouTube channel, so I'm just highlighting it that all these recordings are up there for hopefully perpetuity. So we know that people are going back and looking at them and watching them, because not everybody can attend on a specific night. We've had over 3,000 views, let alone all the people who have attended the live events. So again, huge thank you to those 78 speakers who've given that time to perpetuate this knowledge, and democratize that knowledge. As Robert said, we have had 44 universities or students and graduates from 44 universities. 150 students have registered to participate. Not all of those have taken up the opportunity. Life and exams and work get in the way. But from that, we have formed 12 teams. So there's representatives of each in the audience tonight. And as Robert said, we will be testing the competency framework against the entries. And this is the timber section. And so within the brief, you will see the percentage marks against those timber sections. So 12th of June, the entries will be to be submitted, but we are here to hold your hands throughout of it. So we know we'll be checking in every 2 weeks. We've got workshops aligned for the software, fantastic Miro board that any questions that come out to us. We will long list on the 17th of June. So that will all be made public. We then will go through and shortlist down to 8 by the 4th of July. And then we will invite all those shortlisted teams to come and present on the 22nd of July. So we plan to arrive in the afternoon of the 21st and have sort of an evening together. The 22nd is the whole day of judging. And then an evening of celebration, and obviously Robert's very keen on I'm not sure if it's the ice cream or the burgers, or he's Scottish, so maybe it's the other thing that he mentioned. And so we look forward to seeing not only your entries, but as many of you as we can in Hereford. And so with that, I'd just like to say thank you to all our speakers, all our participants, all our sponsors, but most of all to you, our participants, our students and graduates, for coming and taking up this opportunity and working with us And I see it as an exchange of knowledge. It's not like we're teaching you, you're also teaching us. Together, collaboratively, we can break down these barriers and we can build better from the right materials. And we'd be very happy to take any questions.
Hello. Hi.